next session. Please have your seats and be prepared to be fulfilled of usable and valid information and topics and points of discussion. Today is the day of filling our brains, and tomorrow we will give out, sitting in groups and sharing and discussing in depth. So have that in mind, bear that in mind, please, that tomorrow you will all help to provide and fill in whatever we have found out during these lessons learned. We are still in the session of sharing what the Nordic countries have contributed to Afghanistan. And sometimes we talk about the elephant in the room, the big thing that is missing. Everyone is moving around it. And Tone Tingsgård, you are chair of the Swedish inquiry, of the Swedish engagement in Afghanistan, and we so much want to see that inquiry ready. So hopefully you will also get some contributions during this day. But you have 5 minutes to tell us, where are you? Will it work out? Will we have the inquiry? And Tone, welcome. She is a very well experienced Swedish politician, especially in the field of defense policy. And today, now you're head of this, you're chairing this inquiry. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Head Moderator. Just a few words on the status of the inquiry. I was appointed in July 2015 as the chair of the inquiry to evaluate Sweden's engagement in Afghanistan during 2002-2014. To my help, I have Principal Secretary Mikael Fryling and Inquiry Secretary Wilhelm Brunqvist. They are both present here. We began our work in September last year, and we will present our findings by the end of February next year. The terms of reference for the inquiry puts emphasis on the Swedish engagement in northern Afghanistan. The inquiry shall describe and analyze relevant aspects of the engagement, like national and international context and conditions governing the engagement, how the engagement was conducted with emphasis on civil-military cooperation, coordination and cooperation with other countries, international organizations and Afghan authorities. We are to account for the objectives of the engagement and its results, including budgetary results, and also for the effects on Afghanistan from the Swedish engagement, including the effects on women's roles in Afghan society. From our findings, we are to present recommendations to the Swedish government and relevant Swedish agencies for future international engagements. We have, up until now, conducted more than 200 interviews with political and military decision makers, civil societies, representatives, and researchers. We have read all the reports from Afghanistan from our civilian and military personnel, including the military mission reports. And we have had and have access to all documents we could possibly think of. We have participated in seminars in Sweden and abroad. We have been in constant contact with the Swedish Defense Research Agency and studied their many reports on Afghanistan. We have visited Oslo, Copenhagen, The Hague, London, Washington, New York, and of course Kabul and Mazar-e-Sharif, and met with relevant people in all these places. In short, we have gathered the facts, assessments, and viewpoints we believe are needed, and we are now in the process of writing the report. So for us, it is of great value to be present here today and tomorrow, even if we are not in the position to speak our minds freely. We are free to listen. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. And if you do have some inquiries or questions, we will, at least from the SCA side, welcome to a hearing when the inquiry is ready. So we will arrange some sort of hearing in whenever, February, March, or whatever.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So you're welcome again. Thank you so much for at least saying this much to us. But we have four inputs from the Swedish side to fill up a little of this gap. And it will be carried out in the way that 10 minutes for each presentation, and then collectively taking questions, and not so much questions or discussions, rather than what was said actually, to understand the messages. And the first speaker out is Mr. Bengt Ekman, and he is unfortunately a bit in a hurry, so you will leave us quite immediately when you have given your report, and your questions will be taken by the SIDA representative of Emma Nilenfors. Am I correct? Yes. And Bengt is Senior Program Manager from the Afghanistan unit at SIDA, the Swedish Development Agency, and he's also former Assistant Director General of SIDA. Please, Mr. Ekman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, partners in development. So, two excuses. I have to leave early because I have to attend the funeral, and please allow me to be seated and not standing up here. So, what I will now say is not based on any evaluation. That will be the inquiry later on. So, what I will say is some general observations, results from SIDA's reporting to the government, observations from studies of various kind, and they will be fairly broad and sweeping, of course. So I will start of saying a few words about the international communities, the lessons from the international community's total engagement in development cooperation, and I think we need to see where Afghanistan is now and where it was some 15 years ago. And then, as most of you know, Afghanistan was then a failed state, lacking most of the structures and institutions that build up the state. No elections had been held for many, many years. The country didn't have any proper system for public health and services and education, etc. The economy was ruined after more than 20 years of armed conflict, with the GNP per capita less than half of that one 1980. So the economy was very low at the time. So the task was formidable, to build a state out of almost nothing, coming from decades of conflict, without any substantial revenue streams at all for the new government. Now, if you look 15 years later, Afghanistan has a lot of institutions and structures. Strategies, priorities, policies and plans are being put forward. The basics of a state at the central level at least have been built. Now many, but far from all, girls and boys go to school, and most citizens have access to basic health. And also now what I understand, actually the Taliban has officially acknowledged girls' right to education, and gender equality has a stronger platform than previously in the history of so many years. So that's one really accomplishment, I think. However, long way ahead, as we all understand. Security is deteriorating, peace is elusive, literacy level still at 31% and 18% for women. Poverty level, I didn't hear poverty at all in the first session in the morning actually, but poverty level is not decreasing but actually increasing, and inequalities is also increasing in the country. Self-reliance is decades away. Implementation of all these strategies that have been formulating are far from achieving their objectives. Low capacity, underdeveloped structures. Provincial capacity especially is low, and their mandate is very limited. Citizens' trust and confidence in the government has shrunk. We saw yesterday the Asia Foundation's latest report that was released yesterday, and it showed even lower figure than before. Corruption is endemic. Economy is doing quite badly now since the international forces withdrawn, and the GNP per capita is negative actually last year and this year, and very modest increases during the coming years. And also levels of foreign and domestic investments has further shrunk, so it's short-term trade almost. So this could sound very despairing, of course, but all the cannot rest, and we have to do much better, of course, and much more. And but of course, learn from the lessons from what we heard this morning, and some of what I will present now. Of course, this was a unique situation in Afghanistan. There was no blueprint, and neither for the new government or for the international community when it started out 2001. And second, I think a real long-term approach was not taken. Actually, I read AREO, Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit report, that said that since 2001, the international community has consistently incentivized political and economic short-termism. And the knowledge broadly in the international community of Afghanistan's history, ethnic diversity, society, was missing to quite some extent. And also, I think, looking back, there was far too little focus on the development of the economy as a basis for improving people's lives. Also, I think a fifth lesson was that there was little understanding of the consequences of vast sums of military and development funding coming into the country. Far too weak control mechanism, and this contributed to a corruption culture. As the former US ambassador to Afghanistan concluded in the recent SIGAR report, the ultimate point of failure for our effort wasn't an insurgency, it was a weight of endemic corruption. And sustainability has not been in the forefront. And we heard about the parallel second service and where no real exit was set. So how has then Swedish Development Cooperation performed during this period? I think we had an advantage. We were already, through the Swedish committee, engaged in Afghanistan since some 20 years. We had knowledge of the situation to build on, and a lot of contacts that had been established, not least in the exile community in Peshawar, when we shifted in Sweden from humanitarian to development cooperation. An early evaluation 2004 of the first few years also concluded that the cooperation had quickly responded to needs and had positive achievements in support to stability and state building. We had also at that time also had greater policy influence than could be expected of a small donor, due not least to the Swedish committee experience and close contacts. So one could, of course, simplistically say that the early years saw some real progress. For the next period, 2006 to 2009, we reported that part of the cooperation had to be phased out due to limited ownership and capacity of government institutions. And later on, we also reported that many projects many times performed well at the activity level, but the impact at the broader level, at sector level, could not be seen. Projects were many times not based on sector policies and broader national priorities at that time. Development strategies were also very ambitious and had their 3 to 4 year time spans. And SIDA concluded that the time horizon must be considerably longer and results must be set at realistic level. We can also a few observations on the civil-military cooperation, where SIDA was instructed by the Swedish government to post advisors to the PRT up in Mazar-i-Sharif, and also geographically allocate funding to these northern provinces. One effect of that, maybe little understood, was that dividing up of donors of the country diminished the Afghan ownership and involvement, not least from the national level, and also contributed to an unbalance in provincial allocations. Regarding synergy that we were instructed to do with the military operations, it was easy to express it at the high level, but very difficult to do at an operational level. And we didn't know each other from SIDA and the armed forces. It took considerable time to establish relations, and also we created expectations at the Afghan side that were not met. So I think one clear lesson there is that let security competent authorities work with security and development agencies with development efforts. focus cooperation to information sharing and context analysis. On organization and resources, it took considerable time for Sweden to organize itself in Afghanistan. Only 2008 the Swedish embassy was established, and also in Mazar it took quite some time. And personnel resources were very limited, and we had clear problems with continuity. I think here we also need to take a longer term perspective in looking at resources, looking at the task ahead. We had and still has a strong brand name in Afghanistan due to Swedish Committee's long-term work, and possibly we could have used this more strategically in the policy dialogue to promote priority issues on poverty reduction, etc. However, if you engage in policy dialogue, you must back it up by adequate resources, clear strategy, and a sustained effort. And I think actually on long term we have a very good opportunity. The Swedish government has committed to a 10-year perspective on funding in Afghanistan, and we should take a 10-year perspective of what we are to do in Afghanistan, I think. So thank you so much for my opportunity to give these small observations, and sorry that I have to leave.
Thank you, Mr. Ekman. It's strange how self-evident and clear everything sounds afterwards in this back perspective, and especially happy that you mentioned the Swedish Afghanistan Committee and our early engagement that has helped. I believe Anders Fenge can entertain us with long stories how people out in Afghanistan thought that SIDA and Swedish government were some subordinated division of the Swedish Committee, isn't it? So, next speaker will be Anna-Karin Eneström. Please take your seat. She's Director General for Political Affairs at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Please stand.
Thank you very much.
This one as well. 3 microphones. You know?
Maybe too much.
No. They're all
Should I have all of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know?
Makes me nervous.
CSN, BBC, all of them are here.
Thank you so much, and I'm really honored to be invited to this conference. Not only because Afghanistan is very special to Sweden, and many Swedes, as we know, have been during the years very committed and engaged in the Afghanistan struggle for freedom, democracy, security, and development, but also because Afghanistan has a special place in my own heart, and I see a lot of friends around in this room, and it's very nice to see you again. I also want to thank the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan for their dedicated work and long-term work in Afghanistan. Always with dedication, many times in very challenging situation, but also in very close cooperation with the local communities, and always in the name of supporting the people of Afghanistan. So very much appreciation and tribute from the government side to the work that the committee is doing and has done in Afghanistan. As you know, the Swedish commitment for Afghanistan is long-standing and long-term. Last year marked 75 years since the friendship treaty between the two countries was signed, and Swedish development cooperation with Afghanistan began in 1970. Over the years, strong and wide-ranging relations have developed. The Swedish efforts in Afghanistan have been made in the diplomatic, the military, and the development cooperation areas. And the purpose of the Swedish engagements is to contribute to strengthening Afghanistan's own capacity to maintain stability, security, democracy, human rights, and development. We see that the outcome of the Brussels conference that took place about a month ago in October signaled a very strong commitment from the international community when it comes to political and financial support for Afghanistan for the next 4 years, based on the driving principles of mutual accountability between Afghanistan and the international community. And part of that mutual accountability, we encourage very much the Afghan government and Afghan authorities to to reinforce their efforts to implement the reform agenda. And of course, very important in this agenda is the fight against corruption, the rule of law, democratic development, governance, and human rights. A bilateral agreement on development cooperation between Sweden and Afghanistan was signed in 2015 in order to manifest the importance of our relationship. It confirms Sweden's continued support to Afghanistan, and the agreement establishes a platform for biennial consultations and a continued political dialogue. Already in 2012, a very substantial and long-term commitment for the support to Afghanistan, which we reiterated at the Brussels conference. And Sweden will contribute with about $900 million over the period of 2015 to 2024. And Afghanistan is, as we have already heard, now our largest recipient of Swedish development assistance. Priority for the Swedish government is the women and girls' participation and that they are made part of the solution in Afghanistan. This is key to sustainable peace and development in the country. Of course, also important and as important that their rights are respected. Sweden's participation in ISAF was guided by the objective to support the Afghan government in maintaining security in the country in order to enable political reforms and reconstruction. Throughout the years 2002 to 2014, around 10,000 Swedish men and women have contributed to that effort. After 2014, Swedish contribution continues in the form of participation in the Resolute Support Mission. Sweden supports the mission with about 30 advisors, and a bill has been presented to Parliament that we have sought authorization to continue that contribution also in 2017. We are extremely worried and concerned about the attacks on the civilian population in Afghanistan. As worried are we about the limited humanitarian space and access for the humanitarian actors. There are also worrying signs about increasing numbers of internally displaced people in Afghanistan, as well as many people returning to Afghanistan, which of course is a good sign, but it has to be done in an orderly manner. Civilians must, of course, be protected by all parties to the conflict, and the work of the humanitarian organizations must be respected and humanitarian law upheld. The Afghan people deserves peace. An inclusive peace process leading to political settlement is the only viable option. Sweden is engaged in capacity building. One example is training in mediation in collaboration with the Folke Bernadotte Academy. Our embassy in Kabul is later this month organizing a training in peace and mediation for women from all 34 provinces. The Swedish Mediation Network for Women is a valuable and useful resource for the Swedish Foreign Ministry. Dialogue is, of course, central to Sweden's diplomatic and political efforts, centered on striving for democratic development, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. Also on promoting reforms that strengthens Afghanistan's long-term ability to cope with the security challenges and improve living conditions. The UN's mission in Afghanistan, and I recognize the presence of the Deputy Special Representative Mark Bowden, who's an old friend of Sweden, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank him for his personal commitment to the work of the UN in Afghanistan. The presence of the UN is, of course, key to the development of Afghanistan, and Sweden is entering the Security Council from 1st January. And I can assure you that we will continue to be a strong voice for a continued comprehensive and strong presence of the United Nations on the ground. During the initial years after 2001, we saw a very fragmented international community, and we are very pleased to see that the coordination between the international actors have improved substantially since then. So has also the Afghan own leadership and ownership of the development agenda done, and that this is an important step. That I think also was the result of the Tokyo Declaration in 2012 and the Afghan conference in London in 2014, as well as the Brussels conference that I have already mentioned. So just to conclude, I will emphasize the long-term engagement from the Swedish government in very close cooperation, of course, with SIDA, and we will continue to support security, democratic development, and an economic development in Afghanistan. And of course, we are also very keen to see the inquiry that will be presented during the spring. Thank you very much.
Ask the participants one by one to sit down. Emma Nilefors, can you also be seated? So far, we have just a little time left. One word about this initiative from Margot Wallström with female mediators. Please, it was just mentioned in the inauguration speech by Mr. Bjellefors. You have 30 seconds to say something about that.
Yeah, I just
please.
No, I just said that there will be a meeting in Kabul arranged by the Swedish embassy, where there will be participation of women from all 34 different regions. And this is part of our enhanced mediation efforts from the Swedish government. And of course, I think maybe Mr. Bjellestedt said something about the female network that we have of yes. Swedish and Nordic mediators. So there are several initiatives actually when it comes to involving women in peace and development.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Now we welcome Mr. Magnus Lyning, who is from the Swedish Army Forces, from the Navy. Where is the sea in Afghanistan? We wonder all. But point is that you're head of the Joint Analysis and Lesson Learned Department. So you have a lot to say of Afghanistan nevertheless. Please welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I am a Navy captain. Thank you for letting me speak at this wonderful occasion. We also enjoyed the speeches before me, and they were very much overarching and more focused on what the nations have done. In Sweden, we are still waiting for the big report from Mrs. Tone Tingsgård, and therefore there's no point of us discussing that. However, I will bring you down more to a sea level. And therefore look a little bit about what we've done and evaluated in the armed forces for the last 15 years. And we're about to promulgate a new report where we sort of summarize our, I'd say, somewhere between 13 and 20 most valuable lessons learned that are now in full force, and we are on their mindset with them. A little disclaimer. We're waiting for the big report, and I'm not sure this briefing will be what to your liking, in that sense that we will go out and tell what we did in a grand way. But there are some very important lessons learned that we've brought into the armed forces, and they're in action. Let me say, to tell you the truth, we're in Mali, we're still in Afghanistan, we're in lots of parts of the world, and these lessons learned are definitely working, and they're working with us as we speak. Just a short summary. The Swedish Armed Forces mission in Afghanistan started from a very small scale multinational operation in Kabul in 2001. The engagement grew substantially from 2004 and onwards, with Sweden being in the lead of the PRT Mazar Sharif in 2006 together with Finland. And by area, the PRT Mazar Sharif was the largest PRT in Afghanistan. There's been, depending how you count, there's been about 8,000 soldiers and sailors in Afghanistan. Many have returned and come back several times. And especially if you look at my Navy uniform, I have some comrades that work within the EOD department, and they've been there many times. Our current engagement is listed on the screen. And from 2014, we're active within the framework of Resolute Support Mission, as earlier stated. Our task is to provide advice and train. We're posted in Kabul and outside Mazar Sharif, and we deployed to areas like Kunduz on rotational basis. The mission is still under NATO command. I will now go through a short version of the 14 years of reports that we have. These are focus reports on very, very narrow subjects. And, but my department has worked hard with them, and my assessment is that they are actually lessons learned. I will not go through all of them because I have only about 4 or 5 minutes left on this period, but I will highlight some of them that we think works especially well. The mission in Afghanistan has contributed to developing the gender perspective within the Swedish Armed Forces. Over the last decade, Swedish Armed Forces have integrated a gender perspective in planning, execution, and evaluation of operations with support from gender field advisors and gender advisors. In order to be able to interact with all people, men, women, girls, and boys in Afghanistan, and to conduct operation, it was necessary to understand the concept of gender in the country. The lessons from Afghanistan show that a gender perspective helps to improve the situational awareness and also gives a more comprehensive knowledge about the Afghan society. Let me tell you that the gender perspective now is now a generic part of the Swedish Armed Forces. It is a part, not as a single bullet on a slide, but it's a part of the way we think, how we plan our operations, and how we evaluate them. It is something that we are very proud of. I know there's some media in the room, so a little bit thought for you. Swedish media has had a very low interest of it. Sorry?
Were you about to change picture? No?
No. I just did. I just did.
Okay.
Text doesn't.
Yeah. The same picture. It's with flowers on. Looking outside at this grey world at the moment, it's nice with some flowers on. The Afghanistan had a very pretty low media coverage during the first period. Of course, this increased the more combat situation we ended up in. We also found out that as soon as there's been a contact where there was incidents and maybe even fighting, the soldiers were pretty keen on calling home and telling their loved ones that they're okay. And therefore the news reached out to the media before, and this has opened another strategy of us of trying to be more open as fast as possible. But then, of course, in our line of business, there are stuff and information that are classified. So that we're trying to 3 minutes, yes. We're trying to adapt to that situation, but still be very fast out with the information and as clear as possible. Now over to, a little bit to my, and a new picture. Now, my bread and butter. All sailors and soldiers, it's in their DNA to learn something. We look from our elderly brothers and sisters and predecessors. And if looking at Afghanistan, it was completely needed to have a structural way of handling these knowledges. Especially since we are military, we have a tendency to be there for 6 months, and there's a new team coming in and then go back. So we're rotating pretty quickly. And therefore, there is a need for robust and structured lessons learned. I think the Afghanistan operation has helped us come forward, and I believe we are much better in this issue. Finally, we are soon in the holiday season, and I want to hand out to you and wish you the best of holidays, but also think of the people that are in distress out in the world and the sailors and soldiers that are standing watch for their security and safety. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was looking at the pictures and I saw no women at the first slide. I saw no journalists, but I see challenges and opportunities.
Challenges.
Thank you so much. Please have a seat for the time being. And now, in a row, it was meant to have our Secretary General, Anna-Karin Johansson, as the civil society, that is SCA's presenter. But unfortunately, she's ill. So we will do with you, Bengt. You are a former Secretary General of our Sweden-Afghanistan Committee, and you had also been country director for SCA.
For a very short while.
And you are extremely knowledgeable, so we are happy to have you.
Thank you, it's kind of you to say. Ladies and gentlemen, as I'm replacing Anna-Karin Johansson on very short notice, I will go straight to the main points without much of elaborations. If she had been here talking to you, instead of being sick in bed, she would roughly have told you the following: that SCA has submitted 2 reports to the Swedish inquiry. One report that I will deal with a bit longer here, based on thorough reviews of SCA positions as they have been formulated in writing at different critical points in time. The second is a case study that a scholar conducted this year, and I will come to that at the end. SCA was able to build on its 20 previous years of presence when we start this era in 2001, and it has during the years expanded its programs of service delivery. It has increased its support to the civil society and engaged increasingly in advocacy of human rights, equality, governance, and democracy. The budget has during the years more than doubled, and SCA expressed from the very beginning a willingness to expand and extend in order to reach our well-defined target groups, vulnerable and rural children, women and men. So we continued our programs, expanded and extended them, and in 2008, at the request of SIDA, SCA expanded within its fields of competencies in 3 out of the 4 northern provinces where the Swedish military had engaged in establishing a provincial reconstruction team. In addition, SCA established midwifery schools, supported people with disability, with entrepreneurship and so forth, and engaged in NSP-like projects. Later, a few years later, a stronger political pressure was professed on SIDA to expand development assistance in the same provinces. This was a reflection of the intensified hunt for visibility or for synergies or comprehensive approach or simply COIN, whatever it was called, strategies aiming at districts with armed opposition groups present in need of stabilization. SIDA wanted to see an implementing agency to set up development projects and approached SCA. After thorough exploration by SCA with feasibility studies, risk analysis, etc., SCA opted to expand its already existing activities there and in some areas set up new, and did so successfully, but, and this is the important point, independently. As at that time, or point in time, SCA had developed a consistent position not to accept any project, cooperation, or even appearance together with the military. Basically because any such move would undermine the trust in our field staff and make us seen as one party to the ongoing conflict, especially in the rural areas. And on a more principle level, SCA stated, and I quote, "Development priorities almost never agree with military priorities, and winning hearts and minds and building peace cannot be done by warfare." Initially, though, SCA leadership had remained during the first 6 months after US bombing started in October 2001 silent. In mid-2002, it did, however, express support for the initial military US-led intervention as an expression of self-defense, but saw it already then as overdue. However, SCA was quite hopeful that the ISAF intervention, with its peacekeeping mission, as per UN mandate, would turn out well. And we were quite open for talks to start with. But the broad support for foreign interventions to overthrow the Taliban regime soon turned to frustration with the horrors of war and the many civilian victims. As from the time of the invasion in Iraq, there was an obvious change in attitudes among people. SCA documented these circumstances carefully in efforts to follow developments. And SCA at this point in time took strongly criticizing the war and repeatedly stated that US bombings in Afghanistan illustrates the impossible mission in fighting terror with war. SCA also indicated at that time that the warfare has already facilitated the Taliban return and strengthened the militant Islamism. SCA's extensive presence in Afghanistan with almost 6,000 employees and hundreds of thousands of beneficiaries in more than half of the country's provinces has given us plenty of contacts with military actors of different national background, but also been a most important source of information about the changing national mood. At no point during these years has SCA asked for or felt the need of military protection. Quite the opposite. SCA has experienced several violations, abuses by the military. Schools and clinics have been used as checkpoints and launchers. Intrusions into schools, clinics and offices by troops have occurred, and several interferences into our projects have happened. For the sake of clarity, this has not been in the area where the Swedish PRC operated, but in others, and in several others. As ISAF gradually came to merge with the warfaring OEF, SEA ceased its previous verbal support to the troops. So far, the written documents and statements. Now a few words about the study that we commissioned this spring to a scholar who interviewed a number of staff and beneficiaries in 3 different regions of Afghanistan regarding civilian-military interaction and consequences of the military intervention on aid delivery. One can summarize the opinions expressed. They, the interviewees, generally felt it was a problematic gray zone between different actors, military or civilian, and their different approaches. They complained about what we have called the blurred lines. They also stated quite widespreadly that the long-term effect of the short-term KIPs, quick impact projects, came very soon to be corruption and a loss of trust in the state. No one, practically, and this is equally true in all the regions, made a difference between different national PRTs or the warfaring OAF one from another. It was all the same. And often a thought that often circulated among the interviewees was that, isn't the whole thing an odd idea? Can foreign military troops bring security to local village populations in Afghanistan? No, they said. And in summary, they thought that the international military presence and its civil military ambitions had, by and large, weakened people's confidence in the state. Thank you for your attention.
Please have a seat for a while. So we have now time for questions for these 4 perspectives of the Swedish engagement. We have the diplomacy by the Foreign Affairs Ministry, we have the SIDA, our development agency, we have the military, and we have civil society, people-to-people aid. Please, go ahead. Microphones will be sent around. Of course you have questions. Bengt was very frank. Please come on. We want to hear your inputs, questions, remarks, comments. Well. Maybe you have questions to each other. Were there something that you jumped on, or something you felt that this is not true, or this is very valid in the presentations? Excuse me for coughing. Means that everything is clear now. Finally, here we have a question. Couldn't be that clear. Please present yourself.
Yeah, my name is Sirajuddin Khalid. I work for Folkbank Academy as researcher. My question is on peace diplomacy. Keeping in mind the fact that Swedish committee in Afghanistan has worked for over 3 decades, and the social capital that has created among all areas in Afghanistan, there is a very, the situation, it was very ideal for a country like Sweden to step forward in peace diplomacy. What prevented you? As far as I know, there has been proposals from Taliban also to Sweden to get engaged in this. What prevented Sweden not to play a role in peace diplomacy?
You put the question to the foreign ministry,
of course.
Should we gather questions, or do you want me to reply to the question now? Would you take other questions as well?
No,
so we can
please reply to that one.
Okay.
And use both microphones.
Okay.
We have dual system.
Thank you very much for the question. We have actually contributed to the peace process in collaboration with the United Nations when it comes to on the humanitarian field and on the gender perspective. And these are areas where we feel that we have competence. So it's actually not right that we have not contributed to the peace process, but we have selected areas where we feel that there is competence and experience from the Swedish side. And of course, I should have mentioned that, but we are, of course, very supportive of the peace process, which is the only way of establishing peace and security for the Afghan people. Thank you.
I have a question. The issue of gender is very crucial, and I believe. I want first you, Bengt, to reply to this. In spite of all declarations and suggestions and orders from Swedish government, I believe that there has been a struggle in implementing and carrying out the gender efforts in the daily work in SCA. Can you mention something about that? Has it been an easy road to fulfill all goals regarding gender equality? Or has it been problematic?
Well, to start with, our goal has never been achieved, as far as I am aware. The goals have been floating around, they have been redefined and with increasing ambitions, though there has been clear progress regarding, everybody has mentioned this today, with number of girls in school and progress on decision-making level as well, though we are far from where we had our goals set. So of course it is a problematic road, though so far it's not closed. We hope that we can continue to progress on it.
And as we have learned, this has a great impact on the peace process. And the Swedish government is far ahead as a feministic government in this issue. Can I just say something? Both microphones are valid.
No, I think this is extremely important. It goes to the question posed by the peace process, because I think we need to look into statistics when it comes to the implementation of peace processes, the women's engagement and contribution and involvement in peace processes, and also in development. That statistics show that if you want to achieve sustainable peace and sustainable development, you need to involve the women. And I think everyone in this room knows that. But it's important to rely on hard facts when it comes to that, because it's easy to say that we want to integrate a gender perspective, and we do that all the time. We put women, peace and security into all our texts, but we need to look at that this is actually hard facts in reality.
Sida?
I just wanted to add, as you know, the Swedish government made a decision last year on our new national action plan for women, peace and security, where Afghanistan is one of our prioritized countries. And I know that some of our NGOs a few years ago wrote a report on women, peace and security and the Swedish involvement in that field in Afghanistan, with some quite critical conclusions. So we have some lessons to learn also there, and now we are ready to step up our efforts with Afghanistan based on the Afghan NAP 1325. So we look forward very much to that for the next year.
We have the author in the room.
Missing the target.
Missing the target, yes. And also we're happy to hear that you stressed so much this issue as some of the good lessons learned, I believe, from your side. Now, Norway want to put a question, please. Microphones.
Well, now it's Paul and not Norway, but and as a researcher and not. Since there were no other questions, I'll just sort of try and trigger a little bit debate here. As I said, there was a long debate and a pretty sort of tough debate in Norway about the sort of this separation between the civilian and military effort. And you talked a bit about the sort of the committee's view of this, but could I sort of get the two gentlemen sort of on the table, not very gender sensitive here, but to sort of give their different perspectives, because from at least Norwegian military point of view, looking at the development side as something completely separate and isolated from the military effort makes no sense. As long as you're building a state, you need to take both into account. Whereas, of course, as you say, from the development side, having the military close imply the danger of being attacked in the final resort. How do you solve this? As in, how can we move on? As in, what are our options here? Thank you.
Who wants to start? Nate?
Well, I think the options may be quite a number of them if you look very broadly on this type of problem. In Afghanistan, where the Swedish committee had its own point of departure, we could define our way in a fashion or mode that perhaps not so many other organizations could choose. So, but what I do think is that, and based on the case study that we have done, is that people in general are they are questioning if military staff and developmental assistance staff appear together or have joint projects, at least on the local level. The building of institutions, the building up of security forces is an entirely different thing. That is not something that people anywhere in the world connect developmental agencies to work with anyway. So, I mean, I think it's important to see we have different competences, we have different missions to fulfill. It doesn't look as if we gain anything from any side by mixing them up. I think we get most productive and dynamic by do what we can do and do it right.
Do you agree?
This is I'm not a subject matter expert in this part, but just a little bit philosophical. I mean, there's always going to have a many points of view in a very complex crisis and situation as Afghanistan. And I mean, look at the vast area that covers the great land of Afghanistan, and the different way we work. I mean, but to give you some food for thought, I mean, if you look at the Swedish armed forces, we are peacekeepers. We've never been, we might have been about 500-600 years, or with the Vikings and so on, trying to gain more land. But we are a peacekeeping nation. And there's no unwillingness to work with the civilian part. And of course, there's always going to be a gray zone in that area, if we should back off or if we should be there in support. But it's hard to find a very concrete fixture or a coordinated way of working today that is the absolute truth. I think through dialogue, that's the only way to solve this gray zone. And that's it. Thank you.
Yes, and very valid question. I think we will have opportunity tomorrow in our group works to go in depth with these aspects. Mr. Rutti. Afghanistan Analysis Network, isn't it?
Analysts, yeah, but almost. Yeah, on the last, we also have that discussion in Germany. I think what's important is we cannot talk about development actors in general. They are governmental and non-governmental. And very often CIMIC has been seen in the military by we coordinate even the NGOs, which need to be respected as a separate sphere. Because as SCA has said here in Germany, all those NGOs who have been a long time in Afghanistan have said we don't want and we don't need protection from the military. Otherwise, as you said, it will put us in the firing line. So, I mean, I do not understand when government development actors, as it also has happened, say we don't want to work with the military, but the NGOs need to make up their own mind. But now my question. I was a bit struck by that sentence from the SCA report that Afghans said that foreign soldiers cannot bring security at the village level. I'm not sure whether that also applies to the national level. But when I came back to Afghanistan in late 2001, early 2002, I heard very often from Afghans, so thanks God we have foreign soldiers. We want foreign soldiers because our guys from PDPA to Taliban have messed that whole thing up, and it's only the foreigners who can help. So was that probably an assessment of implementation, not so much of the principle? That's question one. And two, and this probably also our...
Question one put to Bengt.
Actually, it goes to everyone because it's political. I mean, the PRT concept, was that really the right one to make the military a development and state building actor, which it became even more and more? We have all these missions in NATO headquarters in Kabul, even doing, I don't know, developing ideas about how Afghanistan should use its natural resources, mining and so on. Maybe we should have had these provincial security teams instead of reconstruction.
Two huge questions, 1 minute left. Anyone can answer. Who's first out? Bengt.
Well, as far as the first question is concerned, I can only refer to the results of the interviews. This is otherwise, basically, I agree with your own thoughts. That would be my how I remember what I often have heard in Afghanistan. Though in this study, there is no one really believing that that could be so helpful in the rural areas. In the urban, it sounds very often in Afghanistan quite different.
Was the PRT the right concept?
I don't know if I'm the right person to reply to that, but I think these are extremely valuable comments, and I don't want to preclude anything that will come up in our own inquiry. But I think what we need to do is that we need to draw lessons and learn from experience, not only on a national level, but also on an international level, and how the different international organizations actually worked together, and the responsibility by the different organizations in Afghanistan. I think we need to draw that lesson when we are now having huge state building challenges ahead of us in other parts of the world. So I don't want to comment anything in detail, but I think the importance of those questions that you are asking, we need to draw into our own lessons learned, and hopefully take that into account when we're doing state building elsewhere. Thank you.
Yes, it's a very basic question. Now it's like this, that most of you, dear audience, putting questions are men. Now we are a bit overdue in time, but we have a female question, so I will absolutely allow that. So women, come up. We want more of your participation.
From Human Rights Watch, and this will be a very simple question, I'm sure. It also goes to the problem of contradictions in the mission. As some of you may know, last year we published a report that sort of profiled sort of patterns of impunity in Afghanistan, and in that report we included a document from a PRT working in Balkh province, which described corruption, human rights abuses, criminal activities, all traceable to the senior-most official in Balkh province. No surprise there, really. But given that often the response to this is that, yes, well, at the same time, we need the support of such government officials, both for force protection and to carry out the projects we've undertaken. So I wondered if any of you could possibly address that fundamental contradiction, that in order to carry out one part of a mission, we effectively undermine another important part of the mission.
Who do you want to give you the answer?
Anyone from the official side of the table.
Anyone from the official side?
Or all.
Well?
Certainly not the civil society.
Not the... Oh, sorry.
It must be you.
Please use that one as well.
I will not comment on it. It's definitely out of my subject matter expertise here, but it is. I see your point there, but you can also think it that way. If the funds are stopped, and who will be the ones who suffer the most? It is usually women and children that suffer. This is an impossible question to answer, but I think it has to be analyzed and approached in several directions to be able to solve it. But I know, I've seen it myself, when you withdraw money, it's usually the most vulnerable people that suffer from day one.
Okay, so I thank you for this not being a panel, but responding to these questions for the Swedish perspective. And I hope, Tone Tingsgård, you got some at least valuable set of questions to bring with you back. And by this, thank you so much. And I will introduce the next moderator, because now we will have a true panel. Please have your seat. Means that the people coming up will discuss among themselves, and the new moderator for this section is Mats Karlsson. Please welcome. And to say about you is that you are the director of the Swedish Institute for International Affairs, and you have worked with development cooperation for several years, 30 years. Since 1999 you have been a senior leadership of the World Bank, as Vice President for External Affairs, contributing also to the UN system. And you had 12 years in country and regional operations in Africa and Middle East. And you were the Swedish State Secretary for Development in Ministry for Foreign Affairs, also working with European integration, as well as previously you have been a chief economist. So you are very well experienced as moderator. Please have your seat and introduce your panelists.
Thank you very much. Is that too loud? You regulate. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this panel. We have heard from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and the opening, of course, earlier this morning, and now we have the opportunity to reflect a bit on what we're actually intending to learn. I will introduce the panelists in the moment, but let me just say that since I have been working on a number of issues over time and seeing how the world is trying to learn how to deal with fragile states, I would very much want to pick up some of what just came out here in the panel, that we need to think even beyond Afghanistan, because we need to learn how to deal with this kind of situation, because we're not good at it. When I entered the foreign ministry at some point, and some of you are here, I can see you, we had a conference with Lakhdar Brahimi about 1996. How to learn from Afghanistan. I'm not sure how much we have learned. And that conference in itself was preceded by another conference in 1995, I think, or 4, which was put the question, how can Europe learn to live with the broader Middle East and learn to live and integrate with an Islamic world? Well, we can see where we are today. We have a long way to go. And although even though much was said at that time, when then eventually 9/11 came, it didn't prepare us for a deeply thought through response. And $1,000 billion later in military expenditure, $55 billion in humanitarian expenditure, not including at all the foregone economic development and opportunities an integrated world could give. We are here again asking the questions. And the questions need to be answered. We heard from the Norwegian evaluation. On the whole, we have not made a great difference. And we heard from the Danish one, do the right thing. Well, from that one, at least I take, let's think differently and let's try to bring something together. And for this, we now have a panel to reflect on what has been said. And if I can ask Manija Wafik, please, to come up, and Abdul Khalil Raufi, Michael Claesson, and Anders Fenge. I will introduce you as I give you the microphone. You will have to share the microphone here. I will ask each one of you a question and perhaps a follow-up one, and then I'll open up to the audience. We have just over an hour for this discussion. We've heard, obviously, the contradictions or the challenges in how to think development and security in the same thought, how we in practice and in detail learn how to work both in the civic world and the military world at the same time, how to think long and short term, how to integrate gender so that we institutionalize, build confidence in the state and think sustainability and empowerment, as we now know is embedded in the ultimate commitment to deliver on the Agenda 2030. Well, Manija Wafik, you are a co-founder and chair of the board of LEAD, Leading Entrepreneurs for Afghanistan's Development. You have worked with women empowerment, women entrepreneurs for a long time. When you have heard all of this now being presented, you know, there's evaluation and there is lessons learned, but in the end, it plays out in the ground. You work exactly on the front line. Is it moving where you are working?
Thank you very much. I will start with the positive.
Can you be heard?
No?
I think there's something about the mic that you need to...
Oh, okay. Okay. Is that okay now? No? I think I have to then take this.
We get thumbs up, so please go on.
They're separate systems.
They're separate systems?
Yeah.
But, okay. Okay, so yes, I'll start with the positive ones on women's empowerment with regard to the entrepreneurship. So we have a positive energy to go on with this panel and all the discussions that we had throughout the day, that what has not worked so much in Afghanistan, in the development of Afghanistan. But in terms of women's empowerment, the impact has been somewhat satisfactory because in Afghanistan, in a country where women are not recognized as first-class citizens, when there are talked about women's rights and human rights, and women are given the right to first of all to go to school, and then after school to work and have their own income, and based on their own income have that negotiation power and have a say in the family. That's very important. So that's basically for us, for an Afghan woman, it's the first level of the impact is an Afghan woman realizes that she is a human being. So that's the first level of the impact of women's empowerment in Afghanistan. And the second level is for the family, especially for the children. When a woman is educated, we all know this famous saying that if a woman is educated, a family is educated, a society is educated. So that's the second level of the women's empowerment impact. And the third level of the impact is for the society. So currently in Afghanistan, we have around 700 licensed women-owned businesses. And among the 700 licensed women-owned businesses all around Afghanistan, they have invested $6.8 million. And they have created around 4,000 jobs. and 50% of those are for men and 45% for women. So, so you can see that easily how if a woman is empowered, she creates economically. If she's empowered, she creates jobs, and she empowers the whole society. And it's only, these figures are only for the licensed part of the economic contribution of women. We have women who are working like around 80 to 90% of the exporting commodities of Afghanistan, like carpet, spices, dry fruits, and fresh fruits. The workers and the producers are women. So women are contributing into the economy of Afghanistan. And the second issue that is gender mainstreaming, that I thank Captain Magnus and also Anna Karen, who recognized very well the gender equality and gender mainstreaming importance being part of the development project. But what we learned from the implementation and from all these years in Afghanistan is that we have never done gender mainstreaming. It was all an afterthought thing. Gender equality and adding a women's component was really an afterthought. So what all the development projects, when they came into to existence, after a while they thought, oh, we haven't included women. Okay, so 20% of this project should be women. And for that 20%, they thought, okay, we will employ a women focal point, or we will employ a gender expert, or a gender specialist, or a gender officer. And that gender officer and that women focal point was really sidelined in the office, and everybody thought that one person who's a gender specialist or a woman officer, she will take care of that 20% of the project that should go to women, and they were never integrated through the project. So everybody has talked about gender equality as cross-cutting theme, but it has never been so. And our emphasis is that from now on, since we want to do things better, so let's mainstream it. We don't need any more separate gender specialists in the offices. We want everyone, all the staff, to be gender specialists. We want all the staff to be gender sensitive and mainstream gender in their work. And one of the important points is engaging men in this. Engaging male staff in the gender activities and sensitizing them and asking them to be part of the gender mainstreaming process in their projects. Is that enough for the time?
If I can follow up just with one question, thank you very much. What are the main obstacles that prevent you from scaling up what are obviously positive experience that you are referring to? You mentioned 700 female-led businesses. $6 million, that's a very small volume. What would make that 60 or $600 million in investment?
I think the main challenge that women had was they were supported in a short-term span of time to providing them business training or taking them into short-term exhibitions inside Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan to sell their product, but they were never supported in a long-term approach, and they were never supported with their products to be improved. Because majority of the number that I've talked about, the 700, majority of them are involved in handicraft products. So there is a need for a long-term support in improving the products that they are producing and connecting them to the long-term buyers, instead of just taking them to exhibitions where they're selling on a very just the short-term while when they're in that exhibition, and they've never been supported in a very fundamental way to have really standardized products, and even when they're participating in any exhibition, to establish long-term relationships with long-term buyers. So that's what really has hindered, and access to financing is another issue. So for women, because culturally and socially, women, they do not inherit property in Afghanistan. So for banks or for microfinance institutions, in order to get loan, we have to provide a collateral. And unfortunately, many women, they do not own a property to give it as a collateral. And many of these women, their families may not be supportive to provide them the documents of the property for that loan that they need to expand their businesses or start a business. There might be some who wants to start a business with the loan. And the interest rate is really high. The effective rate is 35%. So with that rate for a small business or for a startup business, it's really difficult to take a loan with a effective 35% rate, and with a very short-term payback period. So the payback period is also very short-term. And one of the solutions that we recommended also in the Brussels conference, and also we are constantly in touch with the government and with the international community in Kabul, we are proposing a women's loan fund. We really need a women's loan fund in Afghanistan to provide very tailor-made loan to women businesses in order to scale them up from micro to small, and from small to medium to larger businesses. So we need that, a very special women loan fund that could provide loan with a little bit easier process of the collateral, somehow managing with that, with a lower interest rate than what is offered in the market, and with longer payback period.
Well, there's a lot of experience of that around the world that surely could be tapped into. Thank you very much, Manija. Let me turn to you, Abdul Khalil Raufi. You are the director of Afghanistan Youth Social and Education Organization. You're a well-known civil society activist, human rights defender, and media participant in Afghanistan. You have heard the presentations these mornings, the evaluations. How do they relate to you? Are they relevant?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm starting from a little different from my colleagues, from negative points of peace diplomacy that we have faced in our country from that point. That's except of that making or coordinating of meeting in Doha, Qatar, and then Oslo from Norway country. That except of giving legitimacy to Taliban, it hasn't, or it has no result. Because in this day, we know, or we have heard from several media, and we are in touch, we are near to in this discussion, or near to this process, because I am lead of or head of civil society secretariat of Afghanistan, and we are in some process of peace also. We heard supports of or open door of Russia, except of Pakistan. Pakistan is actually the main supporter of Taliban. Except of Pakistan, we heard from Russia, from Iran, from other countries, which is they are open their door for the supporting of Taliban. Also Chinese too. That goes to make a market for the Taliban from that point, which I get from I have pointed from that lesson learned. Also the good point which I have noted
that was most fund or most donate. They have spent it in civilian, or they have or most high. They have high. They have spent it in civilians. That was 2.3. It was 10 times more than in military. That's a point which we have several advocacy program, or we have several meetings with the government of Afghanistan to have more attention and focus to add more and budget for the civilians, especially in the health, which right now we have 6% of budget, national budget, which is spending in health section, and 11% of budget which is spending in education. That is a good lesson learned for us, and especially for our government to do this point. Actually, the other points which I have noted, that was this lesson learned was that have more emphasis on quality, on quantity. Actually, we are seeing that those projects or those help which have done by international community for us, it doesn't have sustainability. That's why that those donors are those more much focusing on quantity, that making so this have more effective on more effective on bad effective on sustainability, which right now we doesn't have good result of that. Especially we are that I have a point. NATO and ISAF, they have spent a lot of money by their special military, which were on the present by the special mission which they have. If we have a competitor between 2001 to up to now. In 2001, when NATO and ISAF came to Afghanistan, on that time we doesn't have any orders of Taliban, or we doesn't have any on that time any provinces of Afghanistan or district of Afghanistan doesn't were under the control of Taliban. After 2001, in 2003, the Taliban emerged slowly from southern province of Afghanistan. But the NATO and ISAF doesn't have any special policy and strategy to end to that process, or to end to extremism or Talibanism thing, or Taliban power. That is why I'm saying, because we have lots of victims from that fight, which is actually not belong to us. Especially we know in that fight have involved international community and regional level countries. That the special victims of this war is our people. We have a research and we have an advocacy for especially for the military of Afghanistan, National Police, National Army, and NDC, which we have more than 14,000 victims, which they have been killed in the fighting during the 2001 up to in the end of 2013. That's why I'm emphasizing for that, which is to have more attention to quality. Quality is so better than quantity. And the other point is, which I have noted, is it was a good lesson learned for for all of us. That was they are spending much money in service delivery. Actually, the good points for us to bring a peace, which this peace have sustainability. It is good governance. It is accountability. It is it is an accessible government to all citizens, which right now we are facing with lack of that. And other point which my friend has asked Mr. Skandar, that was about development and better and political peace. We have result or bad result of political peace. That is what that is injustice, or that is the making a victim for transitional peace or transitional justice. Right now, the NAG government or national unity government have been signed an agreement with Hizb Islami. In this agreement, we seeing those warlords which they have been killed more than thousands of our civilians. They got their amnesty from this bilingual agreement or political agreement. If we have more focus on development, in this piece will be much focus on social justice or social peace. That in this last 14 or 15 years, it was forgotten actually.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you later. One of the issues you may want to speak to later was addressed during some of the earlier panels, the lack of trust in state institutions or in public institutions and how the youth relates to it. But let me go on with the panel, and I'm sure that we can return to that. Thank you very much. We turn now to Michael Claesson, Brigadier General and Deputy Head of Policy Planning at the Swedish Defence Staff. You have been deployed as head of the Swedish ISAF staff 2011 and 2012, and an advisor at NATO headquarters and at the Foreign Ministry. You have a broad perspective. Do the Norwegian and Danish lessons learned exercises speak to you? Do you recognize yourself in them?
First of all, thank you very much for letting me attend at this fine panel together with these competencies that I have around me. I'm privileged to be here. Yes, I do. Of course I do. I've had the chance and the possibility to work on ISAF-related issues since 2001. Actually, I happen to be the one action officer that drafted the first order for the Swedish commitment to ISAF very late in December 2001. I didn't make the decision, but I drafted the order. And I've been following the mission ever since, and I've also been able to trace it from, or follow the transition. But of course, as you mentioned, in your introductory remarks, I crowned this experience by having the privilege to serve in Afghanistan some time ago. Yes, I do recognize the features presented by my Danish and Norwegian colleagues, and to be very specific and clear on that, we military like to divide things into strategic, operational and tactical experiences. We always talk about command levels, and I think it's relevant in this case as well, because this is really what it is about, a coherence of all three levels. Strategic level, of course, comprising the political objectives. And without a balance between the strategic objectives and the following ones, you immediately create not only imbalance but also problems for yourself and friction. Another very important aspect, not the least when you speak about PRTs as a phenomenon, is of course that PRTs were largely national issues in many ways. They were slightly coordinated by NATO and ISAF, but to a very large extent national issues. They were not supported by any firm doctrine. There were guiding principles, but the interpretation of these guiding principles could vary a lot, if I may say the least. So there were room for national interpretation. And again, I'm coming back to the strategic objectives. If there is an imbalance between strategic objectives of the international organization leading, in my case, a military mission, and the national objectives of an activity within the framework of that international organization, you also create friction in many ways. Let me also say that at the operational level, and coming back to the PRT type of approach, and speaking about more lessons identified or potentially learned, one size doesn't fit all. The PRT system, as far as I'm concerned, emerged from a situation that stemmed from the situation in Iraq after Operation Iraq of Freedom, where there was no civil administration at all, and you had to approach some kind of structural way of dealing with civil military problems. And in that regard, I think that the PRT concept was sort of transferred into the Afghan society. For myself, I had the privilege to work in the 4 provinces of the Swedish PRT, Saripul, Jorjan, Balkh, and Samangan. And there were already from the outset existing presence by NGOs and IOs working perfectly well in harmony with both civil administration and the local society. So there wasn't really a need for that type of concept to have a workable way of approaching both development and security issues. So in that regard, I think that one size does not fit all, and you have to approach the very situation based on analysis focused on that very region and with its specifics, so to speak. And last but not least, coming to the tactical level, and again, I recognize many of the complexities presented by my colleagues from Denmark and Norway. Pre-deployment training, pre-deployment aspects, not the least when it comes to, let's say, the interface between civilian and military functionalities. This needs to be trained not in the field, but in beforehand. It's very much, again, a doctrinal issue. You have to base your cooperation on the firm and very same baseline. I think also in that context that which was mentioned, the frequency of rotations. I would have loved to stay another half or 1.5 year or even 2 years, but I was forced to go back after 7 months because when I started to know my Afghan counterparts, when we were becoming friendly, when they were starting to trust me, it was time to say goodbye. And another one was coming in, trying to build up that trust. So of course it's frustrating for our Afghan counterparts to deal with that type of situation. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'm sure the last point reverberates among many of us who have just gotten to know things, and then it's time to move on. But I will come back to you and perhaps push you a little bit. You said imbalance between the strategic and the actual operational work, and you also spoke about the PRTs, one size does not fit all, but perhaps you can go a little bit deeper and name the tension that is actually in it so that we get it a little bit more out. Do you want to catch on to that now, or I'll come back to you later?
I'll rest for a while.
All right. Then we go to Anders Fenge, a grand old man, of course, in Sweden, ever since I heard the name Afghanistan. You have been speaking, commenting, been active. You've been awarded an honorary doctorate, I know, at Umeå, but I'm sure the primary award that you have is knowing the country deeply, well, and sustainably. Please, what are your reflections when you have heard today's discussion?
The first reflection is on the honorary doctorship. I think it's not bad of a person who never took an academic exam to become a doctor after all. I should start with a small summary of recollection of my years with Afghanistan, which actually started in the beginning of the 1980s and then has followed during this more or less during this last 35 years. And I would talk about the question of hope and disappointment. Where there was a long time in the 80s and so when the war was raging and so on. Then of course with the Geneva Accords on Afghanistan and the withdrawal of Soviet troops in 1989, there was a hope that peace would come. And then came the war between the Mujahideen and the Kabul government, and both supported as pawns in the Cold War and so. And that ended in '92 with the Soviet collapse. And once again, we had some hope, and I think a lot of people in Afghanistan had some hope. Finally, peace will come. And with peace, of course, a more orderly society with development and a little bit more prosperity and these things, an end to the absolutely worst parts of poverty in the country and so on. And then 2001, after the Taliban, we got hope again. Because then the whole international community, for the first time, they came in on their high horses and these things. And we all who worked out at the time, we had very, very big hopes that now, finally, this will be an end to wars and to all the wars, and we will have development, and the whole international community is coming in, hooray, hooray, and all problems will be solved, or at least the main problems will be solved and so on. And then, we know what happened and so on. Then slowly, this optimism and so was going over into pessimism and a lack of hope. And then 2014 came. And then old friends of mine, Ashraf Ghani and Dr. Abdullah, they came into power. And in a so-called unity government, which has unfortunately proven to be a disunity government, more or less, where they can't. Actually, when I first heard that John Kerry had come there to get their heads together and so on, my first reaction, immediate reaction, was that their big problem will be appointments and dismissals, and that is, of course, because politics is not institutionalized in Afghanistan. So it's moving all the time, like everything else and so on. So, in summary, after 35 years with Afghanistan, I could summarize it very, very simply. It is very difficult to not to be a pessimist, or it's difficult to be an optimist. And then when I have listened on these things, it's all very interesting, and so and there are lots of lessons learned and experiences and etc., which is coming up, which are thoughtful and certainly can bring improvement and betterments to international development assistance, to what we are doing in what people. I'm retired. I'm not doing anything, but what people are doing in their professional lives and so on. So but I miss. I mean, it's actually in a sense unavoidable, because if the Scandinavian countries are, as they point out themselves, of course, very small actors in this big game around Afghanistan, and consequently, looking about the different experiences from the Scandinavian countries, it becomes a little bit like looking at a very, very small part of the total experience and so on. I think the Norwegian evaluation is the one which actually, and I think many people here will agree with me, that it definitely has given me the most, because it took both the broad picture and the more narrow, say, Norwegian picture, and then tried to weave it together to a comprehensive whole thing and so on. And did that in a very good manner, I must say. And there was one thing we had here. Actually, I lost it. There was a piece on where there was good development, and then it was health, education, and gender, and all these things. And so, if you look in these folders you got, it's there.
SDGs.
Yeah, and that's all on development and so on. And then there is. I miss one thing there, and the most fundamental thing in this little planche, or whatever we should call it, and so on, and that's the state. If we don't have a state, no matter what country, definitely in Afghanistan. So if we don't have not a perfectly functioning state, but a relatively well-functioning state and so on, then we can forget about sustainable development. If we don't have, if that state don't have territorial control and thus peace, and it has the monopoly on armed force, if that state is not able to bring in a proper rule of law, so that people can get a just treatment from police and courts of law and so, and all these things which actually belongs to a proper state. Not only rule of law, but also good laws. You need good laws, and Afghanistan doesn't lack good laws. We should know that. Yeah. The problem is that Afghanistan is not capable. The state is not capable of implementing those laws, because there are too many goddamned interests, vested interests in Afghanistan, which are, and the state is not able to control these interests. Rather, these interests are within the state as well. So to me, this relatively well-functioning state I'm talking about, that is the absolute precondition for any sustainable development in Afghanistan. And then a few more reflections and so on. I mean, Ashraf Ghani is a man who's, he knows how to, at least from a technical point of view, he knows how to build a state. So it's in his book, Fixing Failed States, and so there is a chapter where you actually can tick off, say 10 or 15 or whatever it is, that these things belong to a functioning state and so on. So anyone who wants to build a state can go to that chapter and so and look. The problem is, of course, what Ashraf Ghani is not mentioning in his book is the most essential precondition, and that is, how do you create the political unity which will agree on building such a state? And that's unfortunately where he has failed. That's one thing. The other thing is, of course, that and I'm not putting any values on this and so, but I mean, the ideal state, which is usually used now in international development cooperation, or we talk about nation-state building for fragile states and these things. It's usually one takes the European national states as the ideal model and so on. And what we easily forget is that these states, the basis of these states were built in a time of monarchies and where people, small elites or even one person sometime only, were governing these states. And they were establishing institutions, courts, and all. One thing which is very, very essential for a functioning state is that you know how many people are living in the country and how many are dying and how many, whatever you call it. It's we say folkbokföring in Swedish. What do you say in English? A census. Yeah, that you have a census in a country. And that has not been possible in Afghanistan. And I remember being with UNAMA in 2002, and Brahimi sent me over to the UNFPA fellow, who was an Iranian. I forgot his name, but he was an Iranian fellow, and he told me that, oh yeah, we are starting up the census now in 1 year or something like that, and then it will happen and so on. And then in must have been 2000, some 6, 7, 8 years later, Sultan Aziz, who is a friend of many people here, so he was then heading the UNFPA Asia department. He was sitting in New York, and I know him since many years. So he came and asked if the Swedish committee could take on, because they had to, in order to do the census, they had to employ thousands and thousands of people and train them and all these things and so on. So Sultan, he asked me if the Swedish committee could take on to employ all those people, because they couldn't employ them on UN salaries, because then it would be billions of dollars, and so we should pay them less. That was the idea, but at the same time give them say insurance and a little bit of pension and these things and so. And so I said, this is too big for me. I have to ask Stockholm in order to give you an answer on this. Okay, and he was there with the UNFPA director for Afghanistan and this thing. And then he left, and I never heard anything again. And I've heard a few things, reading in the media about the census and these things. It does not happen. Of course, and obviously, a very hot political potatoes. Because if anyone who is doing this census and coming up with the result of this census will be probably need a bodyguard of some 20-30 people for the rest of his life, and so he will probably be the most hated person because everybody will have something to say about that census. So this about the state, and then I've been doing this thought experiment and so on. Who is interested of a well-functioning state in Afghanistan? And then you can go through the groups. You can see quite a lot of people in the government. They have their jobs, and so the salaries are not too much, and so, but they have some side incomes and these things, and so. And depending on the nature of their side incomes, and so, they are not interested in a strong functioning state, and so on. Of course, we have the obvious example: the people who are making their money out from the drug business, heroin and opium, and so on. They are definitely not interested, and so on. We have quite a lot of strong people, strong men, and so out in the provinces, who neither are very interested in a strong and well-functioning state. So on and so on. You have other people who are traditionally mainly out in the rural areas, who always try to keep, say, the central authority at arm's length and these things and so on. So who is then interested in having a strong state, a functioning state rather than? Well, the masses, the people of Afghanistan. They are interested in having it too. But who is talking for them? Who is working for them? That's the big problem, I think. So I'm afraid I can't go more into details and stuff, and I'm also sorry that I can't sound more optimistic and looking forward and all these things and so on. But I rest there.
You rest your case. Thank you very much. You do not offer a lot of hope, but you do offer a lot of perspective. When you speak about the absence of a state, or when we do discuss what makes a good government or a bad government, many analyses want to refer to the term social contract. You can have a social contract that says, well, the state pretends to pay you and you pretend to work, and it's called, you have a low-level equilibrium. Here, according to your description, it might seem that at least the elites have an agreement among themselves, a kind of social contract to not have a state, and that is the primary constraint. Now, you may want to pick up on that, Anders, but I also want to turn in a minute to Manija. What would allow a social contract to develop a functioning state? What would be there? Anders, you wanted to come in again, but then we turn to Manija. Did you want to react on that, Anders?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of following up on what I said about when the European national states were formed and so, that it was often monarchies and this rather autocratic rule, and they established the institutions and all this, and then democracy came.
But I guess the point is, where are the roots to a social contract?
Yeah, well, Ashraf Ghani writes about a social contract in his Fixing Failed States and so on. I don't think that there is not a functioning social contract in Afghanistan today. There are some words which have been said in this direction and so on, but I think the main problem to get a functioning state is that as soon as, if we presume, just for the sake of it, that Ashraf Ghani he knows from a technical point of view what you should do in order to have a relatively well-functioning state. And then he tries to get these things through. And every suggestion, everything he's trying to do is met by 511 objections. And there can also be cases when he and Abdullah, they are agreeing and so, and then they are putting it out, and then you get, of course you get parliament, the latest thing now with 7 ministers thrown out, And so it might be a bad joke, but and of course it's not a gender-friendly joke or anything, or democracy-friendly joke or anything like that. But I could imagine that Ashraf Ghani, sometimes before he's falling asleep at night, that he is dreaming of being Abdurrahman. Because it would be much. Abdurrahman was in the 1880s, and he was a very tough fellow, and of course we know he was a cruel man, but he also laid the foundation for what is usually called the modern Afghan state. So.
Not a social contract. Okay.
No, what I say.
That's a good point. We'll turn to the audience anyway. Yeah. Manisha and Abdul, can you give us more hope? How would you do it?
I don't know if I can give you hope. Yes. Okay. First, on the social contracting. So I accept that our government had weaknesses, but the social contracting was very much disturbed by the international community. I'm sorry, I'm being very frank here. The international community came to Afghanistan overlooking the government and overlooking the systems, and they went and directly working with the people and directly working for the people of Afghanistan, and offering their services and offering projects. And that really created that disturbance of social contracting between our people and the government of Afghanistan. And a very good example was given by Mr. Anders, that the UNFPA person, without talking to the Central Statistics Office of our government, he goes to the Swedish committee and he talks to them and asks them, can you please take on the census? Really? This is how it has happened all the time. That's why one of my reflections from the beginning was work with Afghans, not for Afghans. And all these years, what has done international community? They have come up with their designed projects, and they have come and they have in very, very rigid project designs and very rigid budgets, and they have come and started implementing those. And when we have come and talked about it, that hey, this is not what we want, or this is not going to work here, and this will not give us a good result, what we have heard, what was the response? Oh, well, this is the project design. This is how we have designed the project, and this is the budget that we have allocated for it. We cannot change this now. So one of the other recommendations that I had here was, please come up with more flexible programming and flexible budgeting. We really, yes, one hope.
Thank you.
Yes, and then let me just give you to the international community, because this was what I knew, that this is going to be very much for the international community, not for the Afghan government. So the issue of coordination, the international community, they are not working with each other. Okay, so one thing is that they're not working. How can that be after we've said that to ourselves for 20 years? Yes, they're not working. Even from one donor, two projects, they're not talking to each other. Forget about two different donors. Yes, there have been, for the Brussels conference, we did a gender country profile for Afghanistan. And through that gender country profile, we collected around 500 reports. 500 reports, policies, strategies, laws, documents, whatever you name, all different kinds of documents. 500. And still, if today you talk about Afghanistan's some sector, and you will hear that, oh, information doesn't exist on that. Information do exist. It's because nobody's talking to each other. All different donors are doing their own reports, they're doing their own researches, they're doing their own program designs, and even sometimes they're working on some policies for Afghanistan without Afghans. Yeah, so that's really important for us. And let me just take this opportunity, because I have all these points. Long-term versus short-term. We are now really 15 years now far from short-term programming. We now really want to focus on long-term programming. And long-term programming in coordination should come with our all the existing policies and documents that we have, the national priority programs that we have, we have identified our priority areas. Our government, in consultation with our people, have identified. And the very good example is the recent Women's Economic Empowerment National Priority Program, we in PP. So we recommend that, please, if you really want to fund women's economic empowerment projects in Afghanistan, go to the government and see what is written in that document, and then join hands in hand with our government and work towards achieving those targets. Work towards achieving those indicators and finally getting really that bigger impact. So you have not worked really on smaller projects that you have come up with and you have designed them. And the last but not the least, on the rural and insecure regions. All the international community, they find their comfort zone in Afghanistan. So where the bigger cities are comfortable and secure, everybody is located there, and they're implementing their projects there. But we have good examples of few NGOs and few organizations who have also tried to work in very insecure places. And earlier, on the issue, on the question of development towards peace or peace towards development, I really wanted to challenge our colleague that it's from the experience that we had and from the talks that we had with people, it's really development to peace. And I have a very good story from agriculture project. It's the organization is GPFA. If you want, you can look for them. GPFA, they worked in Logar and Wardak province. First of all, the first thing that they thought that was not possible was employing women. So they found a woman in Kabul who became available to go to Logar and to Wardak province. And this lady told her director that if you wanted and if I wanted, we will make it happen. And so she wore burqa and she went to Logar and Wardak province. And on a Friday prayer time, with her burqa, she went and stood up after the mullah finished his preach. She talked about this agricultural project, training for women. So with burqa, she talked to all these men that there is an agriculture project training and how their women can benefit and how the families can benefit. She talked about all of those. And she said, from tomorrow onward, we are accepting applications and our location is so-and-so. And they thought that nobody will come. But then the applicants were hundreds in both provinces. So 100 applicants turned out in both of these provinces. I'll be quick. And then when the training started and they trained women, okay, so there's also another concept that Taliban are among these people. There might be few from outside who comes and trains these people, but then other Taliban are from inside. These are among these people. They're living there. So few men who felt that now women are being trained and development is going on in this district. They sent out night letters to all those families who had allowed their females to go to this training. And so the next day, all these families, they came and shared that we have received a night letter from the Taliban that we're allowing our women. And they decided that they will go to the mosque on Friday and they will announce that because this is very beneficial for their economy, this is very beneficial for their families, they want to do this, no matter if they want to come and kill them all. So all these families, they got together and went on the Friday prayer and announced this in the mosque because they knew that these people are among them. They were there. So they announced that we will continue doing this even if you come and you have to kill all of us. If you want to stop these projects here, you have to kill all of us. So this way, this project continued successfully and trained everyone. And I've forgotten, I'm sorry, the figures, that how their income increased, how all these families started producing agriculture produces and sold them outside Kabul, outside Logar and Wardak in Kabul, and how they all prospered. So this is how if you want it, you can really do it, and it's possible. So really, in insecure places, people, they will become your supporters. They will support, and they will be defending those projects. So we need those kind of stories to hear more in Afghanistan.
Thank you for giving us hope and the classical critique of development assistance world that we deserve, I'm sure. Let me, Abdullah, I'm going to come to you, but I want to invite people for comments, so I will note a few hands. So Abdul now, and then I'll turn to you and whoever else might be signaling.
First, I will correct my sentence before I said about international community supports of Taliban. That was why I'm saying that because of we have a large a strategic advocacy about the implementing of UN Resolution 1373 because of Pakistan. We have collected more than 10,000 signs of our pupils, and we have take that to UNRWA office in Afghanistan, but till now it's going more than 1 year, but we didn't hear from UN about that advocacy of has or more much like this. I'm coming about to the social contract of our president, Dr. Shavani. I was worked with him in 2009 for more than three months. Actually, in the campaign, in election campaign, actually has a behavior which is he has much interest to himself. What is he doing? What's he saying? And what is he will do? And actually, he knew much, but actually didn't have any interest to social interest or to citizen. What is the saying? My argument is also going to the Roshni enlightenment which they have, and several provinces want to bring the lines of electricity from Bamiyan, and just Mr. President wasn't agree with actually more than billions of our citizens. That's my argument about that, which our president doesn't have any interest to show social wants or social interest.
Thank you very much. So the mic goes over here to the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please allow me for a little bit more of time for intervention on what Mr. Anderson said.
Respectful of the time, we have another 10 minutes, and I'm sure there
just
are many.
A little bit more than a typical question is asked. He touched upon a very fundamental and basic issue on Afghanistan, whether we have a good state or bad state, and whose fault it is. And you also elaborated on the social contract of as the Afghanistan government and the people as a nation. Let us go back a little bit to the history and see how we were poor and how we were hopeful, how we were prosper and how we were peaceful. You might know, because you were during the 80s and 70s, you said during the 80s you were in Afghanistan. Have you ever faced someone who tell you that one Afghan is a suicide attacker, or he will just wear a vest full of detonated IEDs and explode himself? Have you ever had this experience in Afghanistan before the jihad and before the Soviet intervention? Of course not, right? Let me finish. My argument is that if we want to discuss Afghanistan case, please be careful and not make it a local conflict. It is not a local conflict. It is a global international conflict. Take an example now. Except for Israel, all nuclear power are somehow engaged in Afghanistan. Somehow. All United Nations National Security Council are involved in Afghanistan. Somehow. Most of them militarily, some of them politically. What do you expect from a impoverished country and nation who is losing his energy in this enormous push and pulls? What do you really expect from a nation that is being played in a global nuclear power ground for their own competition and own contradictory interests? To exemplify this, see,
I'm sure
let me finish, otherwise it will not give sense. I will not make sense if I don't finish it. Please, I beg you, give me some time. So, before post-Soviet Union, we were a peaceful country. The Soviet Union intervened in Afghanistan, trying to bring communism in Afghanistan, which all international community thought as a treat at that time. So you, international community, came and helped us. Oh, there is a brave people. They have an ideology called Islam. They are very brave. So yes, we have a common enemy, communism. Let's fight. Okay, let's fight. Now, why there was a strategic silence after the defeat of communism, and why we were left alone? Do you know how much big price we have paid by that international community strategic silence? Can you realize this? We have been left absolutely alone. And the time was very bad because in Afghanistan there was a hegemony of power by one part of the country, and then after the Soviet Union, the chance was given to different parts of the country, the different ethnicities, and then the civil war evolved and the civil war erupted. And here is the country we have, Afghanistan right now. So my question is, especially international expert, we should not accommodate Afghanistan conflict as an internal war or as a local conflict. It's a global conflict. It's a nuclear power struggle. It's something that we cannot even think that it will be accommodated in the national context of Afghanistan politics or even in the regional context.
So if the context is international, I hate to tell you that the international politics have become even more difficult in the past year. Thank you very much. You made an excellent and important point. Thank you. Sir, here. The microphone comes over here, or the two of them, as we have dual systems, please.
Thank you. Just one sentence in response to that, which is, when Afghanistan was left alone, somewhat alone, it got the Taliban. And now that it's not alone, you have the thing that you're complaining about. So that's the problem. And so my question is really about that. Well, two questions, each is one sentence. Why should the Afghan government make a contract with the people of Afghanistan when it is funded and defended entirely by foreigners? And how can we, based on, given the history that Anders mentioned, is it possible to build a state that defends rights and prevents violence without using quite a bit of violence?
Okay. Sharp questions. Margareta, may I call on you? You have been at the center of the global international system. What have you picked up from the critique that has come out here through the evaluations and from the panel on how we function as a system?
Just like I think General Clausen said, we all recognize it, but as I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, already in 2003, one of our colleagues in the then UNAMA went through some lessons learned, and he identified lessons that we learned and immediately forgot, lessons that we learned and ignored, and a minority of lessons that we actually applied. And I think that's, a little bit the sense of that we have now. Nothing here is untrue or incorrect, but how do we bring it with us so that we don't keep repeating the same issues? And we can help Anders to be a little bit more optimistic next time we meet. So I think that's our intermediate objective.
Thank you very much, Margareta. Okay, I'm returning to the panel. I'm going to give you, just a few sentences each. You just flashed the 3-minute sign to me, so that's the amount we have. If I can start from the immediate right here, Michael, and just a word on it, and then in the end, I'm going to make Anders say something optimistic. Michael.
Thank you so much. I feel obliged to come back to your previous question on if I could give you any hard facts on what could be improved. Well, let me say on the PRT side of the house, or let me put it otherwise. I'll say the civil-military cooperation in not in a military terminology, but in general terms. If I stay in my own box, at least as a Swede, let me say that the Swedish Constitution, which is a wonderful one, does complicate things when it comes to interagency cooperation, and that refers back to what I mentioned in my previous or first intervention, namely that you have to have a common strategy, and the common strategy nationally have to be in balance with the international one you're trying to plug into. So the rest stands for interpretation. What I also wanted to say is
putting
that
the blame and the responsibility on Axel Oxenstierna, are you?
Well, I also think that if we want to look at least conceptually at models that are actually working relatively well and could be developed. I'm not saying that they are perfect in any way. I'm referring to UN, multi-dimensional and integrated missions, where quite obviously both the political, the military, the police, and also the humanitarian side plays into the same political objective. Supposedly. I'm not saying that UN doesn't have any challenges, but conceptually, I would ask you to take a look at the principles and the concept of these missions.
Thank you.
And last but not least, I would also try to pull the hope string. I was and it also refers back to some of the questions in the sessions before lunch, where corruption was addressed, and I often was approached by my officers and soldiers who were frustrated sometimes because they ran into situations that offer them a direct confrontation with corruption, and I tried to tell them that, well, you have to look beyond. You have to look at the second row. The first row, they might be involved in this, but you will always find a second row of people, often the younger generation, with a sharp pencil, a sharp intellect, and a piece of paper, and they are writing down every single word you say. And I put my hope in that generation. Thank you.
Thank you. Manisha. Yes, bring that mic over, please.
Okay, I will just put it here so both of us. For me, my last word would be, let's collaborate and let's work together, and that will take us to somewhere. And let's not work on our own small projects, or let's not come up with our own priority areas. That U.S. government comes up with priority areas for them, European countries, each one for themselves. And then Afghan government has its own priority areas, and Afghan civil society, they have their own priority areas, and none of them meet somewhere. So that's why we're not able to now reach anywhere and achieve anything. But if we all work together towards the same priorities and share the common objectives, then hopefully we'll build the state also, and we will also build the social contracting.
So the question was he asked, Mr. President should have interest to social interest because of he got his disposition from the vote of civilians. We are in a democratic government. Before that was he got the position of president or presidency lead. He was an ordinary citizen of our country. He took this place by vote of the civilian of our countries. My last, not least, sentence will be together we can have a peace or a safe world if we have coordination with each other.
Thank you very much. Anders.
It was said here that Afghanistan was left absolutely alone in 1992, and it's not, to quite an extent, but not exactly true. The Swedish committee was still there, and with the Swedish committee actually quite. Sorry.
You're part of the conflict.
No, not really.
We're rounding off now.
With the Swedish committee, there are quite a few of other NGOs who were then working and so on. Then, of course, these NGOs they were funded by governments, and so the Swedish government mainly funded the Swedish committee, etc. And so in that sense, governments still had an engagement and a commitment to Afghanistan and so on. So what I would say there is that if you want me to end on a somewhat more optimistic note and so on, even if one can point to a lot of failures and mistakes and these things during these last 15 years since 2001 and so on, one of the, of course, there is a lot of positive things which has happened. The problem is there that it's aid dependent, so it's not sustainable as it is now. But also, what has happened, and which is what is positive and so on, is that there is a lot of say human resource development. Midwives, teachers, engineers, etc., have been educated and trained in Afghanistan and so on, and they are still there. And that's also a result of all this. What is there in human resource tend to stay, even if there are refugees coming from Afghanistan. It tend to mainly stay and so on. And then the other thing that is within the international community, if you look on these last 50 years and so, there are thousands and thousands of people who have been introduced to Afghanistan and who have come to as we usually say, they got infected by the Afghan bug, and which means that once you've been there, and then you try to leave, and then that bug is kind of pulling you back, and so on. Nancy Dupree usually talks about the Afghan bug and so on, or the virus, the Afghan virus. Yeah. And that is also a strength, because it means that. In hopefully a more distant future, when international assistance to Afghanistan will start to decrease and so on, there is still a lot of engagement and commitment within the international community who will continue to work for Afghanistan. So, thank you very much.
Anders, and this people-to-people thing makes me say, 1979, I and my brother bought a bus to drive to Kabul, but something happened in between in Tehran. But inshallah, one day we will be able to travel by land over open borders and in peace and confidence and trust. Thank you very much for a wonderful contribution from the panel.
And a big thanks. Now my microphone is out, Jay. Hello. Yeah, here we are. Big thanks to you, Mr. Carlson, for conducting this part of the conference. I think we now need to stretch our legs, don't we? Yes. Come back in 12 minutes, exactly. Coffee? This is the new schedule. Coffee is provided.
De håller ju den väldigt långt.
Guests, dear audience, please take your seats.
Oh, that's fine. I'll pay for it.
Be prepared to open up your ears, open up your brain. Come in, come on. Come here. Please be seated. I should be coughing, that's a good thing. Det är det enda som hörs.
That was effective.
So please give me credit for interjecting this little short intermission of stretching the legs and having some supportive coffee. The 3 o'clock fatigue takes its contribution. Last, but very much not least, we have reflections from a very prominent, distinguished guest. And remember, today is the big day of input, of food for thoughts. And tomorrow you will all be contributing, together with some friends and colleagues that are not present today, but that will arrive tomorrow. But now we will give 20 minutes to Mr. Mark Bowden. He's the Deputy Special Representative for the Secretary General of the UN, Assistant Mission in the Afghanistan, UNAMA. We all know about it. And he's responsible for the development coherence, governance, economic development, and rule of law. That means everything, well, more or less, responsible for everything. And he's doing this since November 2012. And Mr. Bowden is also the United Nations Resident Coordinator, the Humanitarian Coordinator, and UNDP Resident Representative, in charge of coordination of the United Nations system activities, which is the rest of the world, isn't it? Well, so the expectations are high. And previously, Mr. Bowden, he held a senior UN post in Somalia and the Sudan, and at the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. He has served as a conflict management advisor to the UK government, and earlier headed the Save the Children Fund in East Africa and in Bangladesh. Mr. Bowden is a distinguished expert in the humanitarian fields and in addressing emergencies. So please, we expect you to tell us everything we need to know.
Well, first of all, let me thank you and the Swedish committee for inviting me, I should also say perhaps an opportunity for self-indulgence on my side, to have the opportunity for reflection after four, I have to say, very enjoyable years in Afghanistan, which leave me with thought for many thoughts, many reflections, and also many and a sense of tempered optimism, I would say, as to the way forward. I should say that I've been very stimulated by the meeting here in terms of my overall reflections. I actually had a script beforehand which I looked at and have made quite a few changes as a result of that. So you'll have to excuse me for some sort of breaks in the continuity of my presentation. But what I started off was actually with the title when I looked at this. It said what has been done and what can be done better. I'd actually changed that to what could be done better, because perhaps I'm mindful of Margrethe Wallström's comments. We worked together in OCHA at the time, and I think we remembered more lessons ignored than lessons applied. So perhaps we can be more hopeful and optimistic, as the title has here, about can be done. I suspect it maybe could be done. But let me start just by looking at the other aspects of the title, which is what we mean by self-reliance, because I think there's been a confusion in this meeting, and perhaps this is my first reflection, about the difference between progress and self-reliance, because they're not exactly the same thing. Part of the challenge, I think, is to have a common starting point from what we're looking at. First of all, just on self-reliance, perhaps it's a slightly strange concept, because I feel that increasingly we live in a mutually interdependent world. And whether we're looking for total self-reliance is something we need to look at more closely. Really what we need to do is to look at self-reliance from the perspective of dependence to interdependence, and stronger, and getting the balance of interdependence right. And we can look at this either in the relationship that Afghanistan has with the international community, but also in the relationships we have between donors and Afghanistan in the field of humanitarian development and security assistance. I will also look at some of the issues of political interdependence within the region and outside, because I think that sort of interdependence is also quite critical at the moment. And I'm minded at the moment, one of the challenges to self-reliance is the whole issue of refugees and returnees, which is something that's quite important from both the economic perspective of Afghanistan, but also in terms of its relationships. The other thing I wanted just to highlight is that comes out of this is looking very much at the role of the UN, particularly in coordination, and to look at the issues which I think are fundamental in much of this discussion about how we have a more coherent response. There are very different views about what coordination consists of. And I've learnt over the years as a humanitarian coordinator or a resident coordinator that it's not a matter of direction, it's actually a matter of facilitating coherence and getting people to work more effectively together in a more coherent manner. And so a lot of the challenges I think that Afghanistan has faced is actually a lack of coherence, and I think we heard that quite a lot throughout the discussions, and I think I'll try and highlight some of the areas where I think the coherence is improving or what we can do about it. We've also had a lot of discussions here about the security development nexus, security, whether peace is required for development or whether development brings peace. What I would argue is that actually there is a mutual interdependence between security and development. The problem has been that they require a better recognition of each other's roles. And what we've done is confuse the two things far too often. And I think one of the real challenges that we're facing in Afghanistan is basically results from the confusion between security actors and development actors in their respective roles. And that, I think, confusion has led to what I happily described as the world's most distorted aid economy. And I think that a lot of the challenges that we face in Afghanistan is dealing with a history of aid distortions and security distortions in the way that we've carried out. And a lot of the job now is actually to try and rectify the mistakes that were made in the past. Of course, it's very easy to talk about that in hindsight, but I think that there have been a number of challenges that have been created. And in this discussion, we've had a lot has been said about the PRTs, and I was talking to Margareta about the PRTs. I think the PRTs are at the heart of some of this confusion between security and development. And my reflection on them is, in hindsight, of course, is that essentially they filled a void, which was a void of how to address the fault lines between central and subnational governments. And because of that, it led to quite large mission creep, a lot of variation between all of them, and created a state of dependency that we now have to address, and a far bigger gap in terms of the development of subnational governments that we're now facing in the future. So I think that's one of the examples of how there has been confusion between between security and development actors. Other examples of distortion in the economy that I think have been that are challenging is that the security agenda basically, you might say, rewarded bad behavior. So all the investment went into the troublesome areas. The central highlands got ignored. You've got infrastructure development that is extremely distorted across the country. So that's just one sort of issue of where there could have been better coherence, if we put it that way, and now our challenge is to look at how we can address some of the imbalances that have occurred from a security-led development agenda. So let me say that when we look forward, we should look forward not from 2001, but really from the process of transition, because President Ghani, before he was president, put forward this concept that we needed to look at a political, security and economic transition. And I think we really need to see how we've been addressing that transitional process and what we could have done. So I think my first reflection on this, coming out of today's meeting, was did we have a common starting point on the transition? And I think when we look at today's discussion, the answer was obviously not really. that there were different views of what constituted the transition, what was important to do in the transition, and how to move forward. So there was never a consensus around the transition between the international community, government, and civil society, and not even any consensus within the military, the development, or the political actors as to what were the priorities in transition. So I think it goes back to one of the earlier comments made by our comment, if you have no clear endpoint, you can follow any road down to it, and I think that we've been having to address that during the issue of transition. There really has been an insufficient consensus in there, and because of that, we have seen also what I see in many major crises, and it's not unusual in major crises, is the potential for competition between donors, and I think you were mentioning that as well, in terms of sometimes even within donors, and less coherence than there might be in program designs, but also a lack of clarity on what the agreed objectives were. I should say that from my perspective, part of the problem has been that there's been no agreement on what is if we look at it from the political perspective, what consensus was required as to what was the most stable what was a political model that would bring stability. A lot of political work is about mediation and power sharing, not about the political models that actually will lead to a more stable state. So that was a gap, I think, on the political side. On the development side, I think that there were a number of mistakes. I've been arguing for many years since I've been there, and again I picked up on one of the comments that's made here. There's only been one mention today about poverty focus and development, two, and this now makes the third. But it's been absent from any of the development discussions in Afghanistan for a long time. It didn't really feature in the Tokyo conference. It started to emerge in London, but it's only in Brussels that we finally got any discussion of poverty focus in the development agenda. The development agenda has been dominated largely by political objectives. So we've not followed, and this again leads to the confusion between security, political and development objectives. We've not had clear development objectives in Afghanistan, and I think it is time that we actually moved towards those. Moving on from that, I think it's also important to look at how do we better manage consensus and what are our objectives meant to be. I would reflect that in the past, objectives have been driven by the desire to either scale down aid, to leave or to reduce military forces, and to hasten the process. So when I look back at the discussions on the BSA, for example, a lot was left undone in the need to get the BSA negotiations undertaken in terms of what was going to be left behind with the Afghan National Security Forces. And I suppose my reflection on the ANSF is that we had a force that was left behind that was used to a defensive posture, not an offensive posture, that had major gaps in its component, but these were sort of ignored in the need to move out within an internationally agreed timetable. If we look at the other objectives, if we look at the economic objectives, we set massively unrealistic growth targets for Afghanistan. By now, we should be, if I remember the World Bank documentation, we should be at about 8 to 12% economic growth, and we by 2020 we would have been at 18% GDP growth. The real issue is we faced 3 years now of GDP growth at about 2 to 3%, and the economy has been flat. Now, a lot of the transitional economics were based on far greater growth. There was some recognition that GDP growth was fueled quite heavily by the vast amounts of military expenditure in the country. But did we really manage that transition, or have we managed that transition in looking at diversification of the economy? So that's another reflection, is that as we move into the transition, we need to set more realistic objectives that are based to the reality and the needs of the country, not the needs of the international community to leave the country. I think that's a sort of major issue in terms of self-reliance. Finally, I think that I would like to talk about how we move forward from here in terms of our reflections, and to take stock and see how we do move to self-reliance in this new agenda, and to identify some of the main challenges. Some of the common themes that have emerged for me are, as I said, how do we manage transitional economics? How do we move towards a more poverty-focused agenda? How do we look at issues like economic diversification? How do we work with understanding the role of the illicit economy? How do we manage the revenue base? I'm on time, I think. How do we manage the revenue base and public finance management? And how do we look at some of the new challenges? One of the things that worries me in Afghanistan for the future is actually the level of social fragmentation that's taking place within the country. When you have something like a million, in fact we're talking about 1.6 million people on the move. Each province of Afghanistan now is hosting displaced people, and only 3 provinces have no displaced people that they're producing. That's a major social change in the country. People are facing displacement over a prolonged period of time. Added to that, you're taking in this year, of those 1.6 million people on the move, 700,000 are returnees from Pakistan. Another 600,000 are planned for next year. This is a massive social change in the country. So when we look at setting our transitional objectives, and I think this is my final point, we need to better identify an agenda that is adaptive. We talk about flexibility. It's not about flexibility, it's about adaptation to the changes that are taking place in the society, and developing our programs to work in that way. And let me just sort of highlight 2 areas that, apart from the development agenda, that I think we need to look at and take forward. One that's come up constantly in this meeting has been the issue of corruption and addressing corruption. My concern about the corruption agenda, I have the indulgence of sharing my own prejudice at this stage, is that it's very donor-focused. Basically, it's become a value for money agenda for the donor community. That may sound a bit harsh, but I say that because a senior advisor, who I know, kept on saying to me on corruption, have we done enough to please you? Have you got what you want? That's the discussion that took place before Brussels. There isn't a strategy, there isn't a structure put in place to address corruption. So corruption is one. My other major concern is really the issue of policing and security. Policing is a key issue. My concern at the moment in security terms is that there's an increasing dependence on local militias and the militarization of forcing. The main driver for that is actually through the police. We reformed the army, we didn't look at the police, and there's no consensus in the international community as to how to address that. That is something that we'll have to learn to live with, I think, in the future, unless we do that. So, as I've run out of time, let me just say my final conclusion is that transition is a long-term process. It can't be hurried. That there's a lot to build on in Afghanistan. There are some good policies and strategies, but there also is a need for greater coherence in the way that we address them, and a willingness to address some of the more difficult problems. And on that, my final note is it's not flexibility, it's adaptability and changing to circumstances and recognizing them properly. Thank you very much.
So, my friends, time has come to close up, and you will be unquestioned and uncommented. But I saw that your notes were made in handwriting.
Yeah, I'm old.
I think we are eager to take part of them. So I have a suggestion practically, so we can share them easily without you having typing all night or whatever you've been saying. But thank you so much for a very valid conclusion, I think, of today's discussions. And it's still discussions. Tomorrow we will come to fruition, isn't it? Sit in the groups. Just a few words of what's going to happen tomorrow. When you arrive here at 9 o'clock, or if you arrive at 8:30, you will have refreshments and coffee. But at 9 sharp, we start inside here, and then you will be seated in the groups that you're already divided into, because you should be acquainted to each other and have a good team feeling when we start working. So there will be keynote speakers, 2 of them. There will be group discussions for quite a long time. And you will have coffee in the meantime. And then, together, we will draw the conclusions. We will extract all these golden eggs with the help of all speakers and everyone who has contributed today. So it's a huge group work tomorrow for all of us. What more to say, Jane, for tomorrow?
Not much.
Not much there?
I just want to show this document that is in the... Now I'm not speaking in the microphone, which I'm in this document, you find your group. And I have had... there might be some minor changes to the story. And the moderators will have questions and plans for how the group work will proceed.
And I think we should say that the moderators for tomorrow are also very, very experienced and qualified people who will help you in the groups to reach your goals. And there will be rapporteurs in every group extracting in writing what's been said, and they will give that in to Bengt. So it will be a long lunch because we have to prepare them for the final session. So tomorrow is a working day. But in order to be in good shape for that, don't miss now the mingle outside. Refreshments, good refreshments, and a lot of nice get-together. Thank you all for today. Tashakor.